Good evening. On behalf of the Taking Down Nova Coalition and on behalf of our ancestors who fought continuously for freedom and liberation, in that spirit, I'm telling people that this struggle against white supremacy, the struggle to remove white supremacist names from public spaces and public places, is a long-going struggle. It did not just happen this year because of what happened in Charleston, South Carolina. A group that I headed in the 1990s, the African American Liberation League, began in the late 80s to agitate at the Orleans Parish School Board around two things. One was that there were no African American studies in our schools, and so our kids would not learn about their own history and therefore couldn't know about the valid history that their people engaged in their fight for freedom. The second thing we wanted to do was to remove the name of all of the slave masters from our public schools. We made the argument that it was crazy for our schools, which were at that time 93% black, to have our schools to attend schools and be awarded diplomas named for their slave masters. And we made an argument, we mobilized the community, and finally in 1994 we were able to get the school board to pass a resolution that indeed the school's name for slave masters should indeed be changed. And as somebody alluded to earlier, by 2005, so it's important to understand that this struggle, which also included the struggle by Dorothy May Taylor to integrate so-called Dorothy May Taylor, of course, was one of the more outstanding of our black elected officials. She had courage, she had pride, and she also understood that the struggle to remove all of this white supremacist garbage from the streets of New Orleans was important. That is why that ordinance was adopted. And we should say that when that ordinance was adopted, we objected to the is that we are opposed to nuisances. And of course, we think that is a very narrow way to look at things, that either we are about morality, we're about progress, we're about democracy, or we're not. If we're about morality and progress, we have to say straightforwardly that racism is wrong, white supremacy is wrong, and to give any kind of public acknowledgement to those who represent that ideology is wrong. Of course, that was asking too much of the school board and asking too much, apparently, of the city council. Even in the present struggle, they're trying to keep us grounded in a discussion about whether or not these statutes are nuisances. And the principal stand we take, of course, is white supremacy is wrong, and we are a city that stands against white supremacy, so these statutes should be wrong. And that is why it's very important that we understand that the struggle is not just about 4 statutes. It's about every statute in the city, every street name in the city, every school name in the city that is named in honor of those who support white supremacy. They have to be done over. And what I want to inform people tonight was that this is a long-standing struggle. Our struggle stood on the shoulders of those who fought against the honoring of John McDonough. They used to call Founders Day in the schools John McDonough Day. And what was so shameful, they used to bring all the school kids down to Duncan Plaza and lay flowers on the wreath of John McDonough. But they would make the black kids stand in the sun and wait until all the white kids had done their business. And so that's so, in a sense, some of our ancestors, they organized a boycott of John McDonough Day. And that was the first real public shot across the bow that black people in the city were not satisfied with this army of these people who represent their oppression and exploitation. And so we see ourselves in advantage that the struggle that we're waging today is a continuation of that struggle. And even though a lot of our people are misunderstand the importance of the struggle, and I like to quote Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman said that she could have freed thousands of people had they known they were slaves. And it's the same situation that we're faced with today. The New Orleans Tribune said there's 99 other things that are more important than taking down the statue. And we say that unless you understand that this is a struggle of both ends, it's important that these symbols of oppression, exploitation, and white supremacy, they must be gone. We don't need those in other places. And it's that relationship between symbol and substance that has produced 52% unemployment in the black community, that has produced schools that don't educate our kids. And if you don't get that connection, then that becomes our task. And that's why we formed Taking Down the Old Coalition. This is something that we've got all of us working together and to educate our fellow citizens, our fellow residents about the importance of this struggle. And I'll leave it at that so other people can dive into that.
So in the interest of time, I'm also going to go from history to economics to morality to legality to psychological impact to intersectionality. But Wes has got to get out of here, so I'm going to let him jump to the economics. We're going to jump back to the then Tracy, then Reverend Sanders, then Emily, then Felicia, then Rob.
Once again, my name is Wesley Myers. It's a pleasure to be out here and just talk a little bit, I guess from a social, economic, political standpoint. I'll leave it to Ms. Tracy to talk about the economics. More specifically, I think her story is one that needs to be heard. I'll talk a little bit about sort of the political aspects of it. I know when we talk about the history, at least of one of the monuments of Liberty Place, we kind of talk about the unfortunate circumstances that created the monument, but a lot of what I've been focusing on or looking at is sort of how it's evolved, right? In 1891, you had this monument placed, but then it was in 1932 when you started seeing the next evolution of how this monument was going to, what it represented and what people wanted to represent. At that time, there was political leadership that ran the mayor's office and the city council. It was called the Ring, also known as the Regular Democrats, in order to make sure that the residents clearly understood what this monument was about. They helped lead the charge to get the plaque placed on the monument that specifically said this is in honor of the battle to overturn the governors of Louisiana at that time and to install white supremacy and to overcome and represent white supremacy. This is important because even though in the last 30 or 40 years the organization and the influence that they have has waned somewhat, primarily in 1970 after then Mayor Moon Landrieu and the coalition that he was able to put together went into office. But the Ring still exists, right? And they're still trying to instill influencing political processes. In fact, in a couple of weeks, you'll get, some of you, maybe most of you, will get a piece of mail from them. They'll say, you'll get something that says RDO, the Regular Democratic Organization. It'll list how it's the oldest political organization in New Orleans, over 150 years old. But what they won't tell you is that they were the Ring. They were the coalition that for so long represented a lot of the conservative and quite honestly oppressive thinking that came out of the city of New Orleans and its leadership in the late 1890s and the early part of the 20th century. And it's important because you'll see the people that they endorse. We've seen the people that they've endorsed in the past. A lot of the leadership, like I said, going into and up to 1970, with then Mayor Gaspar Shiro, I'm saying that name correctly. Skiro, thank you. Even then still being represented and still espousing these kinds of beliefs. And it's important because these groups, these organizations didn't just organize within kind of a political group. They had the idea of the social clubs, right? Then the reign of regular Democrats, now the regular Democrat organization, they did their business in a space called the Choctaw Club, which doesn't exist anymore, it's torn down. But I bring it up because it's the idea of how these social clubs still may and still do exist, and how they're able to espouse political thinking. And another example of what I want to spend just a little bit of time and then I'll kick it over to the next panelist is the idea of the Boston Club. Now, many of us have passed by and seen the Boston Club's building, right? If you've ever noticed, if you're familiar with Canal Street, you know where the New Era building, the Sports Plus building in the 700 block of Canal Street, there's also a 3-story White House that just sits there, right? And if you've noticed, you maybe you've seen people leave out of it, and maybe you haven't. But this is the headquarters of the Boston Club, which was established in the 1800s as an exclusive club at that time for people to be able to play the game of Boston. But as many things evolved in New Orleans, it went from just a game to something that became a political and economic bastion. It became an elitist organization for mostly, now it still is all white membership. One of the requirements is you have to be a New Orleanian for 5 generations. So you figure that one out for 5 generations.
But not Jewish.
But not Jewish. Now it's also interesting when you bring up the Boston Club and why I think this is important, is that the Boston Club has a direct relation to something that you brought up with Ms. Taylor. The Boston Club is also the funneling of membership for Rex. In fact, if you want to know the membership of the Boston Club, you can't find a list, but just look at every single king of Rex. It's always come from this club. Business leaders, civic leaders, people who control hiring, people who control decision making, are folk who make up the Boston Club, the folk who make up Rex. Even the black members who got accepted into Rex don't get to go on the Boston Club. The only way you get to be a member of the Boston Club and get to go on if you're a person of color is if you have a tuxedo and you have all white clothes. And the thing, I say this is important because as we talk about the idea of how supremacy plays a part in not just symbolism, but how it plays in our politics, how it plays in our civic leadership, how it explains things, how you get conversations of how can you have a city where a majority of your African American men are either unemployed or cannot participate in the formal labor force, but yet we have so many people who control businesses who have job openings. We keep hearing about these job openings, so where is this disconnect happening, right? And why are we not seeing that you have a group of people who are looking to be hired and want to work, and you have a group of business owners who aren't necessarily trying to open the doors? So for me, a lot of times, from a personal standpoint, I always try to highlight the idea of Mardi Gras. I think it's a great example of what we believe in New Orleans and how we believe in handling our business. That ultimately, if we don't push back on the idea that those people that have a lot get to give little trinkets of nothing to the many that have very little, and if we don't understand how that plays out in our political, economic, and social sense, whether it's in these monuments or everyday business, then we're fighting a battle that we are going to struggle to win. But I wanted to just share those kinds of pieces of information. One, because it's political season, and two, is to make sure we're continuing to ask the question about how things are connected. I'm kind of on this panel, and I'll shut up soon, because I talked with Quest, and I was telling him about my frustration post-Katrina. Katrina 10 week, because we know the people who said after the storm, we don't want you to come back. We know the people who said that we're going to change this city in demographically, geographically, and that this city was not going to look the same that it was. What we also know is that those people happen to be members of organizations like RDL, and the Boston Club, and the Choctaw Club, and CONUS, and MONUS. So the question becomes, as we continue this fight, as we continue to finally strike down the ideals of oppression and white supremacy, it's who else do we need to talk to? Who else do we need to push? And ultimately, how far are we willing to go, and how often are we willing to push people to get to that sense? So, with that, I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Next word for Beyond Wonders.
Okay,
Our struggle against white supremacy is directed against the rich millionaires in their state. In the fight against white supremacy, there are some who agitate the struggle against white supremacy, the campaign for the removal of monuments, markers, symbols on public sites, etc., is ill-advised. Such voices argue that there are many other pressing concerns that demand public attention. The voices who promote these ideas argue that unemployment, the privatization of public education, the crisis of affordable housing, poverty wages, police and judicial corruption, etc. are urgent matters demanding priority. We hear these statements from leaders of the Democratic and Republican parties, leaders from reformist organizations that make up the civil rights industry, like the Urban League, for example, the church community, particularly the Catholic Church and the Presbyterian Church, the media, and other misleading elements. For many of these misleaders, the campaign to tear down the white supremacist symbols is separate from the struggle to improve the economic and social well-being of the oppressed masses, especially the African-American oppressed nation. But many of these misleaders do not remain neutral in the stands they take. Instead, they actively agitate and organize against those who fight against white supremacy because they know that the defeat or the weakening of white supremacy strengthens our movement against the rich millionaires. These struggles are not mutually exclusive. The class conscious or the enlightened workers understand this fact. The struggle against white supremacy is a struggle against the economic and political system that we live under, a system of thievery, by the rich, of the rich, and for the rich. The objective of the rich millionaires is to exploit the workers to maximize their profits. Class-conscious workers call this exploitation wage slavery. Spreading white supremacy further enables this wage slavery. I'd like to share with you a very brief history of this neighborhood, Carrollton. In this community where we're meeting this evening, this neighborhood grew out of the former McCarthy plantation of the early 1800s. A number of white, wealthy men came together and purchased the land and developed this area, which would become the city of Carrollton. This neighborhood, Carrollton, is named after William Carroll, a Kentucky soldier who served with the white supremacist General Andrew Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. Under the leadership of Alvin Junker, a partner in the New Orleans Canal and Banking Company, and other business owners, the land would be divided up into lots and sold to the white public. The investors would make a fortune. Junker's bank would later merge with Whitney Bank here in New Orleans. Junker's son would later continue the family banking finance tradition by becoming one of the owners of Security Homestead, also here in New Orleans. As part of this new land development, a public space would be created and named Hamilton Square after Alexander Hamilton, one of the financiers of the American Revolution. In 1902, the City Council of New Orleans would rename the square Palmer Park in honor of a famous white supremacist Presbyterian minister, Reverend Benjamin M. Palmer, a former resident from Charleston, South Carolina. Reverend Palmer is well known for his famous Thanksgiving speech of 1860, where he argued for war against the Northern Yankees to preserve chattel slavery. In many of his speeches, some of which are available on Google, he argued that blacks love being slaves and that God's divinity has sanctioned this practice. On July 8, 1902, 6 weeks after the death of Reverend Palmer, the city of New Orleans passed ordinance number 1322, which read, "Be it ordained," not adopted, "be it ordained by the council of the city of New Orleans, that as a testimonial of esteem to the memory of the late Dr. B.M. Palmer, that the name Hamilton Square, bounded by Dublin, Carrollton Avenue, Sycamore, and Mobile Streets, be and hereby changed to the name of Palmer Park." Our source for this is synopsis of ordinances located in New Orleans Main Public Library. In March 1874, the former seat of government of Jefferson Parish, the city of Carrollton, would be annexed to the city of New Orleans. In September 1874, an armed counter-revolution would temporarily overthrow the black Reconstruction government with their white allies by members of the city's capitalist social class. They represented the owners and bosses of the factories foundries, banks, business merchants. In time, they would successfully overthrow the black Reconstruction government and restore their political class rule. These representatives of the wealthy business community were colleagues and allies of Reverend Palmer. Future mayors would come from this social class. For example, Charles J. Leeds was New Orleans' 33rd mayor. In 1844, he was part owner of the Leeds Foundry, where the artillery was made and used by the White League in the Battle of Liberty Place against the Metropolitan Police and the black soldiers in September 1874. Next was Mayor Edward Pillsbury, who before the Civil War was a merchant and cotton factor. Later, he was a Confederate soldier. After the war, he became an agent of a large Honduran Latin American trading business and a member of the elitist Pickwick Club and Order of the Odd Fellows. Then, Mayor Isaac W. Patton. There's a street over here, right on the other side of State Street Magazine. Patton, elected in 1878, served in the Confederate 22nd Louisiana Infantry and a member of Captain Pleasant's company in the battle in September 1874 with the White League. He was a commissioned merchant before he was elected. Then Joseph H. Shakespeare followed next. He was elected in 1880. Although a descendant of a Northern Quaker family, he upheld white supremacy. The city's 37th mayor, William J. Behan, was a business merchant, manufacturer, and a sugar planter. He commanded one of the companies of the White League on September 14, 1874. After his term in office, he became the Major General in charge of the Louisiana National Guard and also a Major General of the retired Confederate veterans. Lastly, there was Mayor Joseph Bowson Gillott, the city's 38th mayor, who was also a leader of the White League and commander of one of his companies on September 14, 1874. What's my point? My point, for almost 40 years after 1874, these people ruled this city. Now, all of these despicable misleaders were associates of Reverend Palmer and other white supremacists of the ruling business class. So when you hear some unenlightened people, some backward or mentally undeveloped people, or some outright traitors and reactionaries say the struggle against white supremacy symbols is not important, you can't erase the past, you can't change the past, you can't change the way people feel, etc. Tell them this: our struggle is not about changing the past. Our struggle is about defining and championing our future. The future of the majority. The future of the lives of the majority. And not all lives. Because this is not a fight to protect the lives of the oppressor class and its criminal dictatorship of the rich, a dictatorship unrestricted by any law. Democracy, in its most strict meaning, is concerned about the lives of the majority, unlike bourgeois democracy that is concerned about the lives of the numerical few. In closing, may we work together to further expand and enhance this struggle, particularly engaging the thousands of members of the working class in the city and our youth from the neighborhoods, schools, and universities. I leave you with these closing demands. Rename Palmer Park. Remove all Confederate names and white supremacist homages from public art, monuments, buildings, streets. Replace these shameful symbols of white supremacy in public art with those names that fought for the victory over chattel slavery and those that struggle for complete emancipation. Down with the dictatorship of the rich. Raise the wages of the working class. Self-determination of the African American nation, up to and including the right to an independent republic. And for those who like to have a copy of the ordinances that govern the enslaved people of this community, we have some copies free. We have some copies to give away. We only ask for a nickel or dime donation.
So good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Major Tracy Riley, retired. And in 1994, I entered this beautiful city and attended school here at Dillard University. Graduated with a business management degree, emphasis in marketing, and immediately was recruited to work with Ford Motor Company in sales and marketing. I also became an ROTC cadet and simultaneously, upon graduation, began serving our country. And for the past 24 years, up until 2014, I aspired to the rank of major as an Army reservist, and I have reach the position of regional sales or service manager for Ford Motor Company, and then I jumped over into a company called W.W. Granger. So I've kind of had my foot both in the military side of the house as well as the civilian sector, and had sort of a dual career. I was raised in Mississippi, rural Mississippi, born in 1971, and I had older parents. My mother raised us 4 kids on some acreage in the middle of the state, Collinsville, just south of Philadelphia. I'm sure you're familiar with the historical significance of Philadelphia, Mississippi. Well, my family comes from Philadelphia, and I am a distant relative to Mr. Cheney, who lost his life as part of the 3 murders. So I was raised with this issue of hatred and superiority and fear from very little. But I was always taught that the way for a better life was through education, going to church, doing unto others as I would have them do unto me, and go out and stand on my own, fight through whatever the challenges were, get my education, and then the playing field would be leveled even for me, African American, female, Mississippi. And so after serving 24 years to protect our country and the tenets of our Constitution, which are to preserve and protect for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what this system is all about. So that we can all pursue that journey, whatever that means for each of us, individually and free from interference. That's basically what this whole construct is about, as it's written in our Constitution. And unfortunately for me, after having been isolated to a degree, working in corporate America, working in the military, and having come home due to injuries sustained while in the military, I did not know the state of things were what they were. And so I decided to open a business in the French Quarter because I have children who are artists. And I decided at 42 years old, having to pick a new career for myself, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Do I go back to corporate America, or do I create some foundation for my kids and other artists in my community to build from? That was an easy answer. So I found a building at 300 Decatur Street, and we called it the Rouge House. It's a 16,500 square foot, 4-story building, nearly in the heart of the quarter. And our mission is to bring independent artists in from the elements and give them the facility, the resources that they need to take their God-given talents, be it singing, poetry, dancing, art, what have you, and create with access to industry-level professionals to help them to develop themselves and their product, create a product for them to make a living on versus being exploited and robbed and all of that. And so that's what the Rouge House is. We're a full-service restaurant with a very large stage. We are also a recording studio. We are also an internet radio station, and we have access to independent filmmakers. That is our purpose. Unfortunately, when we opened our doors in 2013, we came into very, very aggressive opposition from 3 organizations here in New Orleans. the Bucare Property Owners and Residents Association, also known as the Visapora, the French Quarter Management District, also known as FQMD, and members, or residents rather, a variety of residents, also members of the Visapora. And they use their civic engagement in a very negative way. They use their access to resources and their primary belief that that particular real estate belongs to them. And they were able to influence our political figures to make decisions about public access to state privileges, and basically dictated to them how I would be awarded a permit, the last permit that I needed to open my doors. And so, without that permit, this building and this business is closed today. Not because we didn't meet the criteria for being issued this permit, but because very mean-spirited and perceived racist-minded people of these organizations got together strategically and have been influencing our elected officials to determine how decisions about your public access to these privileges are going to go. And that is fundamentally a violation of all of our rights. Economics, I believe, is the engine that makes this whole thing work. New Orleans brought in over 9 million visitors in 2013, over 9 million. That equates to over $6.4 billion in tourism alone. That's absent of the oil and gas industry. That's absent of anything else that the state produces. Tourism. So then you think, well, what constitutes tourism? You've got your hotel industry, you've got your entertainment, transportation, singing, dancing, performance, and food. And lastly, alcohol. 9 million people come to New Orleans. It is the tourism destination location of this country. It is a huge opportunity, especially post-Katrina, now that we are the new Orleans and we have this resurgence and everyone is innovative and technology is on the rise, and all of this wonderful growth is happening, especially for startups and entrepreneurs. Well, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a startup. I gave you 24 years. Happily. I knew what I was doing when I was 17 and I volunteered. I wanted to be able to contribute to this country so that I could enjoy the second half of my life. And I married another soldier. I call him the other Major Riley. 28 years. And so we are coming to the close of our chapter of service in our lives. And instead of rocking away on our porch and telling war stories, which is what old soldiers do, we decided to come back and give back to our community. And unfortunately, while New Orleans, Louisiana for that matter, has so much to offer for anyone who's interested in doing the work, this state could be so wonderful. And I believe that we have people here willing to do the work. And we could take this state technologically, in the human in arts, technology, STEM, we can take it to the next level. But because of the color of my skin, and how do you know that, Tracy? Well, they called me the N-word and told me to get out. They don't want me here. So when that happens, and then you come across information. The ATC just released a huge story where the lead agent in New Orleans, they got his text messages off of his state phone, and there were messages from the lead agent that said, "I effing hate the N-words there, the scourge of the earth." This is the person responsible for making sure that people who receive the permits in the French Quarter actually get them. I'm the only African-American female business owner in the French Quarter. Only one. And so, yes, this is about white supremacy. And so when I was called and asked to come and share the story and relate it to the importance of the statutes commemorating these historical figures, that's what they are. They are historical figures. I think that we could do a better job in how we use our symbols. Simple sort of example is the American flag. When you see the flag, you kind of straighten up and, well, at least we do, trained to, go to the position of attention, salute it, put your hand over your heart. Well, the same thing about these monuments. They're scattered, salt and peppered through the city. These people represent, when we talk about life, they represent death to me. Because it was my ancestors who were hung from many of these trees. I live on the north end of what's called the Stark Plantation. And it's the most beautiful scene that I could think of, second to Gone with the Wind. But when I go outside at night, because it's Louisiana, I'm haunted by images that are created in my mind based on the stories that I've been told and I've learned in books of my ancestors hanging from these trees. The building that I occupy, 300 Decatur Street, was built in 1793, before this country even recognized Louisiana as a state. It was built by slaves who were owned by the French. And it's really haunting to walk through the building at night and feel, the presence of their spirits. And I actually feel good about that. I happen to think that the people who built those buildings and who worked in those buildings in some way would be proud that we reached a level of equality in this country, that everyone could have such access to business ownership. And that's what I'm about. So as we're walking around the city, and we invite so many people around the world to come here for 9 million a year, when they come here, we want to show them our best, right? We have evolved and have grown and we have fought together and we've achieved a lot. I would rather we show statues of things that we can be collectively proud of, not images of death, of slavery. When we think about life and liberty, to me those statues are death and slavery. And there's nothing happy about death and slavery. So I'm Major Tracy Riley. That is part of my story. And like any soldier, I've been trained to fight when and face an adversary. I don't know what quitting is. I've been engaged in this battle for 18 to 20 months. And we have put this issue into the legal system. And so my mission is twofold. Number one, to get justice, and number two, to tell the story of what's really happening to keep everyone, not just Black people, to keep everyone out of economic opportunities here in a state that has so much to offer. It could be tomorrow that no redheads are allowed. Or no guys with double earrings. Or no one with curly hair. Right? Could be. That's why we all need to be involved with this process. It's not a simple symbol. It's not a simple matter that needs to be ignored. The Army teaches us it's the details, it's the small things that really create something wonderful or horrible. And so I'm here as I'm going through this legal process to get justice. I'm also here to share the story so that we can put an end to it. Because I'm here not only to get justice, but I'm here to fix this system. It's been around far too long. It's time to retire. So thank you for giving me your ear.
It's hard to tell you. We've had some great presentations, and I was moved by all of the presentations. I won't be that long, but I know I'm going to say that long, Jim. I was like that. My name is Torrance Sanders. I'm pastor of the 6th Baptist Church, 18 years. Started when I was 5. Felicity Street uptown. I'm also a social worker. Assistant professor of social work at Southern University School of Social Work. I'm a former elected official. I was president of the Long Beach Parish School Board in 05 and 08, and husband and a father, 2 boys. I was asked to talk about morality, spirituality as it relates to this, and I get real high in the sky on that kind of stuff, real philosophical and theological. And I'll try to go there in a second, but I guess I want to give us 3 ways where, on a personal level, what's personally motivated me to be able to get involved in this issue. One is that I was born and raised in New York City in the Bronx, but my family, both my parents are from Charleston, South Carolina, and I spent every summer growing up in Charleston, and there as well as in New York. I experienced my share of white supremacy and racism, and more than that, witnessed my relatives dealing with that, and tears at times in terms of different experiences that I witnessed or was related to me. Second reason is that I mentioned my church, 6th Baptist Church, and I love telling people that I told Quest, I said, he said, on 6th Street? I said, no, it's the 6th Baptist Church on Felicity Street. But it's called the 6th because we were the 6th Black Baptist church founded in the city of New Orleans in 1858 by slaves and freedmen who walked out of Coliseum Square Baptist Church, led by Reverend John Marks, because of white supremacy. And they founded 6th Baptist Church on Rousseau Street in 1858, and then in 1874 moved to our current location where we still are today. And so, as a pastor, I always reflect upon that origin in terms of to inform what we should be about today and the things that I should be involved in. And thirdly, Charleston was mentioned before, that I'm a member of a fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And I was one of perhaps our most well-known members, Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Young, but Reverend Pinckney was also a member of my fraternity.
Dutch Mario.
Well, yeah, Dutch Mario, that's right, you're right. And Mark. But Reverend Pinckney was a member of my fraternity, and I didn't realize it, but someone told me, said, yeah, you were in the room with him back at Morehouse when our president was being installed. And I was like, wow, and it really just kind of brought it home in another way for me. And so, when we think about this issue, we think about morality, we think about everything that has been said. It brought to mind the scripture, and I won't preach to you, but in Matthew 16, it's a pretty familiar passage to many people, where Jesus asked the question of his disciples, and he says, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And then after they, go around a little bit, and then he says, and who do you say that I am, directly to his disciples? First he was asking them, what are people saying about me? And then he asked them, what are you saying about me? But before that dialogue, it says earlier in the passage that as he entered into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, and Caesarea Philippi was named Caesar and Philip. Philip was the king, the tetrarch, and he wanted to give honor to the Caesar, who was the emperor, the head. And so there were statues erected in honor of Caesar. And Philip, being the king, also had statues erected to his honor. And that's why the name of the city was Caesarea Philippi. And that was the context why Jesus asked them the question. Because we're sure that as he went into Caesarea Philippi and he looked around at all this stuff honoring these men, he said, well, what do they think about me? Now, I'm not going to go too deep on that. But Jesus understood the impact of those statues and those symbols and what those leaders were trying to teach and instill in those people about who was in charge, about whom they should respect, about whom they should celebrate, about whom they should be inspired by. Does that make sense? Right. And religious leaders, knowing that, as Jesus understood that, understand clearly that symbols matter, sacraments matter, rituals matter, because they not only teach us, but they try to get us to remember and even then move us to either commemoration or celebration. And so it is no small matter because statues are messing with our minds. and we know that it's messing with our minds, and that's the intent of it. When this issue arose recently, and I was a part of a group of interracial pastors who began to talk about this, and it was a great series of conversations. We ended up with writing a letter that over 100 pastors and religious leaders, white and black, of different faiths, denominations, did sign on. But in that, we heard that in one church, Trinity Episcopal Church, and they said, hey, when we looked at the history of Jefferson Davis Monument, first signature, it was a committee that got that established, went to the legislature for funding of it. First name on it was Archbishop Blink. Second or third name was Bishop Sessoms of the Episcopal Church. And so religious leaders, of course there was also Lawrence and some other people there that we know. But the religious leaders took leadership in erecting this stuff. Religious leaders understanding symbols today should take a stand in pulling this stuff down.
That's right.
We know that what they represent is domination, subjugation of other people. It represents denial of the humanity of people. It represents restriction of opportunity, economic and otherwise, education and otherwise, to people. And somebody from Trinity Episcopal Church said, yeah, members of our church bring their children down to those monuments to teach them how to celebrate the legacy of those monuments. And that shocked me. I think nobody does that. But they do. And so this really matters. Morality is a system of conduct. And so what system of conduct are these statues and symbols representing? And conduct deals with your choice of action. Because every day there are those who are still choosing to deny people their just rights. There are people who are choosing to degrade other people. There are people who are choosing. And Wesley talked about the political realm and everything. And I had my foray into the political realm, and I'm going to close with this. And I know because every time the paper said I was going to do something that wasn't too popular, I would get calls from some of those same people that he was mentioning. Reverend, come to our office. No, you come to my office. Reverend, we need to meet with you. Can we buy you breakfast? I went to McDonald's. Already. And so I personally also understand the stranglehold that many of the people that he's talking about try to exert on every political and elected leader in this city. And so when we're looking at, well, why is this seeming so hard? Why is this so hard? That's why this is so hard. But that's why we must work harder. And the quote that I love, I'm not sure who said it, but it said, to be silent is to pick a side. And so let us speak up and pick the right side.
Hi, I'm Emily Ratner. I'm really glad to be in this space. I'm really glad for all y'all who came out tonight. You have a lot of lives. I'm grateful that you're here. I can't wait to learn from you in the breakout sessions. But I'm really grateful for this phenomenal panel. I feel like I've learned a lot tonight. I was just thinking, the pastor was speaking, I just moved, and for nearly 10 years before that, I had been living in what I would always describe as a location that was 2 blocks from Lee Circle. Just because that's how people know what you're talking about. I just moved to a place that I now describe as 2 blocks from Palm Park. So it is kind of interesting how, as you were talking about conduct and symbolism, how this stuff just factors into our lives in all of these ways. So my work relates to civil rights and criminal defense, and to what I kind of think in a broader sense is a struggle against state violence. I think that term can mean a lot. When I used to describe my work, I'm talking about kind of a literal violence when officers of the law use violence against a person, or when violence is used in the sense of depriving a person of their physical liberty. That's how I think of state violence. So I tend to look at this stuff through that kind of lens first and foremost. So I'm talking about the code, the municipal code article, ordinance that allows for this dialogue that's happening, authorizes dialogue about removing these statues as public nuisances. So I'm just going to kind of walk through how the ordinance works, what it means, what it says, which we heard a little bit from Malcolm about, but I'm going to do that, and then if y'all will indulge me very briefly, put my little state violence lens to that. So, I'm not going to read you this thing because it's cumbersome, but this is Article 7, Section 146-611 of the Municipal Code, in the event that you want to pull it and read the language for yourself. Basically, what the ordinance does is it creates a process whereby either the city council or anyone who has the right to vote within the parish or within the district can ask that the city council consider that a monument, statue, plaque thing that's in public space, it's on public property, be removed because it is a public nuisance. And what I really did not fully understand until this whole thing kicked off, the whole kind of debate we're having citywide around this issue, is how narrowly the ordinance describes or defines public nuisance, which Malcolm spoke about a little bit. I don't think we would ever guess this definition when we hear public nuisance. But what is meant by that, there are 3 requirements to be a public nuisance. Number 1, the thing, statue, plaque, whatever it is, honors or upholds the supremacy of one racial or ethnic group, promotes violence against a racial or ethnic group, kind of contradicts our constitutional sense of equality under the law, or promotes or glorifies violence against public employees. This is not a realization that I can own as my own, but notably, we may well be the only city in the nation that actually has a monument to the killing of police officers.
That's right.
Yeah, so remarkably, that is actually a live issue in this thing. So number 1, you have to have that. Number 2, check.
Yeah.
Number 2, the thing we're talking about that's in the public space has to either already have been or it may become the site of violent demonstration. I have my opinions on our police chief. I know others in the room do, but I will say he's actually already made some favorable comments as to that particular issue. Number 3, you gotta have all 3 of these. Number 3, that the cost of maintaining this thing, cleaning it up if it's defaced, securing it, if there's a concern that there might be a violent demonstration, having the police and whoever there, protect the people, all those costs must outweigh the historical value of the thing. So, is a public nuisance. City council may then hold the hearing, at which point they have to seek a recommendation from various groups within the city, kind of by virtue of those entities or groups or individuals' interest in public property, public safety. So that includes the chief of police, the historic district landmarks.
Right,
Yeah, landmarks commission, the human relations commission, city attorney, those type of entities. The city council is then required to ask them to weigh in. And as y'all are seeing, these entities kind of one by one are kind of going through that process. At that hearing as well, the city council has to allow for the public to speak, either submit written comments or stand up and address the city council. At the conclusion of the hearing, the city council makes findings, at which they find that the thing at issue satisfies all three of those requirements of being a public nuisance. They can then cause for the removal of the thing. So that's how this ordinance works. And what I would just say, if you will indulge me, this ordinance was passed in 1992. And we have heard, and let me say first off, that there are people in this room who are sitting very near to me who have far more experience with this ordinance than I do. We're a big part of its existence, so I want to acknowledge and heard that 100%. What I think is interesting, in addition to the historical context that we've gotten from some of these remarkable panelists, is to look at state violence in this more narrow sense in terms of the history of our police department. The early 90s, I find to be a really kind of remarkable chapter in the history of our police department. One of the criticisms that I think this group and other advocates for removing these monuments and these other things has gotten is, why are you focusing on that when fill in the blank, right? And one of the things that gets filled into that blank is when the violence is the way it is, when crime is so bad, right? When kids are killing each other. We hear that one a whole lot. So I like to look back to the early 90s when we first got this ordinance. Between the kind of 1990 to 1994 period, New Orleans was the murder capital of the nation, which it off and on is, right, as we know. That was a time when violence among youth in the city and murder among youth in the city was at a very high rate compared to the rest of the nation. Similarly, 1990 to 1994, this is coming right in the middle of that, our police department was widely regarded as the most brutal in the nation. Highest rates of police brutality in the nation, right? This is also, for national context, this is when you have the beating of Rodney King, which creates a lot of new tools. When that happened, that created a lot of new tools for formal federal intervention into state police departments or city police departments. And I think, as a lot of us probably know, you don't have that. You don't get federal government policing police unless you have the pressure of people policing the police, right? That's the only time the police are going to police the police. So, early 90s nationally, Rodney King, new tools in Congress. Locally, and I'm sitting next to a major force in this movement from well before this 1990-1994 period, so respect and deference to that. But as I understand that piece of the history, a very brief gloss, 1990, Adolph Archie is arrested for suspicion of killing a New Orleans police officer. Adolph Archie is a black New Orleanian. Very shortly after being arrested, he is beaten to death by New Orleans police officers. 1990, and there's a lot of organizing led by some of these people related to the Adolph Archie murder. 1992, this comes along. By 1993, the federal government, and this is that era where we had the highest incidence of police brutality in the nation. 1993, the feds are really looking at New Orleans, and they are actively investigating a particular officer named Len Davis, who later, it will come out, was running a protection operation for a drug ring through the police department. So he and other officers under his direction, and it may sound like a conspiracy theorist to some people, this has all been through federal courts, just so this is uncontroversial, established history of the city that we're in. So Len Davis ultimately goes down for running protection for the drug ring. He will also go down for ordering a successful hit on a citizen who filed what she thought was an anonymous complaint against him for excessive force. That would be in 1994. Also in 1994, Chief Pennington is brought in to run the police department. He's brought in specifically because he has no history with the city and with this a brief period of time, it looked like he was going to be able to establish reforms that were going to last over time. That's a very, very painfully brief gloss off the early 90s. Flash forward to the time we are in now, right? We have a national movement moment that I think really is directly related to police violence, specifically aimed at Black people, right? That's our national moment. In our local moment, we have the federal intervention into our police department. We have specific instances such as the Wendell Allen shooting, the Jason Sip shooting, these are the more high-profile ones. We have the remarkable upset of the Danziger Bridge convictions. We've also seen some setbacks in the Henry Glover convictions, other high-profile police killings from the Katrina era. So we have this kind of police moment, police violence moment moving both locally and nationally. And what I think, the reason I think that relates back to what I had said about why are you focusing on this when the kids are killing each other is this. In the history of this city, there appears to be a very clear correlation between rates of violence among civilians and rates of violence and brutality by police against civilians, particularly Black civilians. So what I would say is that as we are having a debate about the states and the cities subsidizing of the glorification of violence against Black people, let us recall that that directly relates to state and city subsidizing of violence against Black people, right? State violence against Black people. So to me, whenever people say, why are you focusing on this when you should be focusing on that? Because it all comes back to this single and lone point. So as long as you allow people on behalf of the state to kill people, specifically people of color, specifically Black people, with impunity, as we are seeing in those police cases that I mentioned from this era and in the early 90s, the ones that I'm not mentioning, I would just say that I think that that direct correlation can be drawn. When that criticism is put to this movement, I see that as a challenge to answer back and say, yeah, actually it's 100% related, and let me tell you why. So that is the reality. Thanks for your attention.
Good evening, I'm Bernicia, and I am a third-year political science major at Dillard University. And I love what everybody had to say. I agree 100%. But I won't talk about how it relates because we all know. But I'll, I guess, talk about more so how I feel like these symbols and these street names and these school names affect the people who, well, the young Black people who live in these areas and go to these schools and have to walk by these huge statues. Okay, so I'm 20 years old, and as I said, I'm a third-year student at Dillard. So I do a lot of reading, and being that I'm an activist and I love this work, you know, I read books and I talk to people and I've acquired a lot of information. And with the Taking Down movement, I realized that, you know, okay, I realized that, like, Major said, I don't know. Right. Major Riley said, she said that they don't teach, they wasn't teaching African American studies in the Black schools, but Robert E. Lee, PGT, and Jeff Davis were all in my history books in high school and in middle school. But did I know that they were against the construction? And did I know that the Reconstruction era was the progression of Black people? They didn't tell us that. So when I talk to young Black people that are like me, and I talk about the symbols, of course they say, you know, why focus on that when you focus on this? And it's like, you don't see how you go to a school, like you say, you go to a school, John McDonald, and that's at the top of your diploma, and your name is smaller than his name. And you worked 4 years to get your diploma. Whatever. So, I would say psychologically, we are, and excuse my language, fucked. Because we don't know. We don't know, and then when we start talking about it, we're oppressed, so we sad and we emotional, get off topic, and it's just too much. I'm tired too. So I just say psychologically, yeah, I'm tired. So
You from New Orleans?
yes, I'm a native from across the now. The Bush School.
High school.
I graduated from Lake Area, early college high school. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I'm really charged up, and so I'm gonna stand up. I'm gonna stand up because you'll probably be able to hear me better, and so I can't hide behind the table. So thank you so much for coming out, and thank you to For USA for hosting this forum. I'm really grateful and humbled to be asked to lend my voice tonight. My name is Robin McDowell. I'm 29 years old. I was born in Korea. My family lives in New York, but I live in New Orleans. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a researcher of material history, and I'm a member of the Take NOLA Coalition. I believe that the monuments that are slated for removal must come down immediately, and that our elected officials must pursue the removal of all monuments, street names, school names that memorialize and glorify murderers, torturers, punishers, and oppressors. Period. I stand here tonight in solidarity with those who share these beliefs and demands, and with those who do not and did not have the freedom to write their own stories. These monuments don't tell these stories. These monuments are tools of a society fueled by the punishment of Black bodies. How much clearer can this be? The poet and scholar Amy Césaire said, "It is with their heads buried in the dunghill that dying societies utter their swan songs." It is time for these celebrations of a colonial white supremacist society to be buried in the dunghill. We walk to the river, to work, to school, to visit our friends, and we look up into the faces of men who bought and sold human beings as property and fought for the ability to do so. These monuments and signs are more than pictures. They're more than tales of bygone days. They're active parts of an abusive system in which intentionally unequal distribution of power and resources goes unchecked. These are ways of writing, of communicating information through the environment. And so a landscape that tells a story of dehumanization, natal alienation, and social death is not beautiful to me. I can feel neither safe nor complacent in a city where Black bodies, Indigenous bodies, and bodies of color can still be stripped of identity, dignity, and political and economic opportunity by modern practices of slavery that merely go by other names. I'm not Black, and I am not a New Orleans native, but I am standing up tonight because if I sit down or remain quiet, I will add to the growing numbers of residents who give silent permission every day for many people in this city and state to generate hateful, oppressive symbols, vocabularies, practices, and policy. The monuments aren't silent. When I listen, I hear voices from the auction block, from the prison industrial complex, from sometimes just around the corner. Once non-Black allies and accomplices start to listen and learn, our silence can then be permission. I went to City Hall for all 3 hearings this summer, and I sat amongst many still willing to die for the ideals of the Confederacy. To these people, the monuments aren't relics of a lesson learned. They're heroes. Their likenesses are raised on pedestals, not as images of defeat, but ones of glory, ones of immortality, physical centers for public adoration of masters. If these signs, monuments, and public visual culture have no influence on people's mindsets, behavior, and ethics, then my education, career, and vocation have been for naught. And I do not think this is so. We have to give future generations a chance to form identities around and start learning from somewhere else of the ways in which thousands of voices have been silenced, bodies mutilated, families severed, and communities shattered. I would ask anyone who sees this too, who these ideas resonate with, to also stand up and not give permission for this exhibition to remain open. Every week, people ask me why I have a dog in this fight. New Orleans has bigger problems, they say. But white supremacy and its reputations and its partner, white privilege, and the terror wreaked on Western society through both of these sicknesses is not just a big enough problem, it's all of our problem. It's not fair that a few upset Black people and tour guides get to change city policy, one of my friends told me recently. I disagree, and I'll conclude by saying that large-scale Black and Allied resistance from New Orleans working class translated into action that is both self-transforming and structure-transforming is not just possible, it's imminently present, and it has been for longer than many people are willing to believe. I've heard and seen it in this neighborhood, I've heard and seen it all over this city. I believe it is in this room, and that is why we are all here. And I'm certainly not a spokesperson, but this is why I have stopped being scared to stand up and speak up. Because none of us are free until all of us are.
Yeah.